It was just another quiet Sunday morning when everything changed. The kind of day I usually looked forward to after a long stretch of night shifts, silence, tea, maybe a book on the patio. But that peace shattered the second I opened my front door and found it, a neon pink violation notice fluttering in the breeze, taped dead center on the door like a passive-aggressive award. I squinted at the paper, confused. Excessive noise complaint, final warning. My eyebrows furrowed. Final warning? What first warning? And what noise? I hadn't even had friends over in weeks. I worked at the hospital 4 nights a week and spent most of my off time asleep or minding my own business. The loudest sound in my apartment was my electric kettle. I double-checked the address. Yep, definitely mine. The signature at the bottom of the notice didn't surprise me, though. Karen. Of course. Karen lived 2 doors down, but she may as well have been the self-appointed sheriff of the entire block. HOA president, head of neighborhood watch, and the kind of person who used binoculars to monitor the height of your grass. I had heard of her before I even moved in. Rumors of her measuring fence lines and calling the city over someone's wind chimes were practically legend. She had a particular distaste for renters, and I was the only one on the street. I took a deep breath, trying not to let my frustration bubble over. I figured it was best to address it head-on, so I walked down the street and knocked on her pristine white door. Within seconds, it creaked open just enough for her face to appear, a tight-lipped scowl, a narrowed gaze, and reading glasses perched at the end of her nose. Yes, she asked, like she'd been waiting for this moment. I held up the violation notice. Hi, Karen. I just got this on my door this morning. There must be some mistake, I haven't made any noise. I've been working the night shift all week. She crossed her arms and gave a little, that reeked of condescension. Well, multiple neighbors reported loud music, drums, and shouting late at night. If it wasn't you, who else would it be? You're the only one who's newer here. I caught the slight pause before newer, the one dripping with polite disdain. Translation: you don't own your place, so you're probably the problem. I stared at her, stunned. No real evidence, just assumptions. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said, trying to stay civil. I've literally not been home during the hours listed. Are you sure this isn't coming from somewhere else? Karen didn't blink. I take complaints very seriously. If you continue to violate the HOA's noise policy, you could face a fine or even risk losing your lease. I suggest you be more considerate. And just like that, the door closed in my face. I stood there for a second, stunned, the pink slip still in my hand. I walked back to my place, thinking, there's no way this is real, but something didn't sit right with me. I'd heard the occasional thump or guitar riff around the neighborhood, but never enough to even bother checking the source. I just assumed it was a car driving by or some teen messing with their speakers. But now I was starting to wonder. So I decided to run a little experiment. That night, I called out of work and stayed home with the lights dimmed and windows cracked open. I sat on my couch like a stakeout cop, phone in hand, ears open. For a while, there was nothing but crickets and the distant hum of traffic. I began to think maybe I was losing it. Maybe there had been a random burst of noise and I'd somehow missed it. And then, right at 8:07 p.m., it started. First, a low thumping that grew louder by the second. Then came the unmistakable crash of cymbals and the screech of an electric guitar. My jaw dropped. This wasn't someone's stereo, this was live. A full-on band. And it was close. I slipped on my sneakers and walked out my front door, following the sound. It didn't take long to pinpoint the source. Karen's garage door was slightly ajar, light pouring from beneath it, along with the unmistakable chaos of drums, amps, and teen angst. I crept up the sidewalk and peeked through the opening. Inside, Kyle, Karen's son, was shirtless and drenched in sweat, hammering away at a drum set like he was in the middle of a stadium show. 2 other teenagers were wailing on guitars, and a fourth stood at a mic, screaming lyrics so garbled I couldn't make out a single word. I stared, stunned. There it was. The excessive noise she'd written me up for, right in her own garage. I pulled out my phone and recorded a short video, just enough to capture Kyle's flailing drumsticks and the ear-splitting feedback from the amps. I wasn't planning to post it online. This wasn't about revenge. It was about proof. I looked toward the house, half expecting Karen to burst out and shut it all down, but no. She was inside, watching TV, the flicker of the screen reflecting off her living room window. Oblivious? Hardly. I'd bet money she knew exactly what was going on. Back in my house, I replayed the video 3 times, still barely believing it. She had gone out of her way to file a formal complaint against me, knowing full well it was her own kid turning the neighborhood into a punk rock concert venue twice a week. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The more I thought about it, the more furious I became. Not just because of the false accusation, but because she had weaponized her position in the HOA to deflect blame and protect her own. She assumed, like a lot of people do, that renters don't have power, that we're transients who won't push back. But she'd picked the wrong renter. By the time midnight rolled around, I was crafting a plan. I was going to gather evidence, compile city ordinances, and take this straight to the HOA board. If Karen thought she could bully me into silence, she was about to find out just how loud things could really get. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, still buzzing from the discovery the night before. I didn't need coffee, just the burning mix of annoyance and vindication. Karen had gone out of her way to accuse me of something I didn't do, and now I had the receipts. Literal video evidence of her son pounding on drums like he was auditioning for a heavy metal apocalypse. It wasn't just a one-time fluke either. That performance had been practiced, routine, and far too loud to ignore. I got to work like I was building a legal case, which, in a way, I was. First, I went online and pulled up the city's official noise ordinance. I combed through it, looking for anything relevant. Time restrictions, decibel levels, permitted and non-permitted uses of residential garages, zoning laws. Sure enough, there it was, clear as day. No loud music, amplified instruments, or any sort of concert-level noise allowed between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. in a residential zone. Perfect. I printed the section out and highlighted the important parts in bright yellow. Next, I wrote out a timeline. The date and time of the noise. The fact that it was Karen's garage. The names of the people I recognized, mostly from seeing them around the neighborhood with Kyle. I even added a line noting that I'd originally been blamed for the noise. That part felt particularly important, and honestly, I hoped it stung. Then, the icing on the cake, the video. I clipped a 35-second snippet of the footage I'd taken the night before, making sure to capture the moment Kyle stood up on the drum stool and yelled something into the mic before crashing down into another round of thunderous noise. You could clearly hear the bass shaking the walls and the clatter of cymbals reverberating off the pavement. I saved it on a USB and made a note to attach it in any email I sent. Satisfied, I slid the whole packet of evidence, printouts, notes, and a USB drive, in a manila envelope and quietly placed it under Karen's door. There was something satisfying about using her own tactic against her. She loved delivering violations like sacred scrolls. Now she had one of her own. I didn't expect her to respond, but I didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, there was a hard knock on my door. I opened it to find Karen standing there, looking like she'd just bitten into a lemon. Her usual smugness was gone, replaced with a twitchy, barely contained rage. "How dare you film my son," she snapped, not even pretending to say hello. "How dare you accuse me of noise complaints that weren't mine?" I shot back. "You made it public. You posted it on my door. I figured you liked that kind of communication." Her nostrils flared. That footage is an invasion of privacy. I tilted my head. You left the garage open. It was visible from the street. Not exactly a private concert. She opened her mouth to argue again but paused, realizing I was right. Instead, she shifted tactics. This doesn't concern you anymore, she said, voice tight. I've already handled it internally. The matter is closed. Internally. That word again. Karen's favorite way of saying she'd bury it under her carpet of control and gossip. I nodded slowly but didn't say anything. I knew better than to push her in the moment. There was no winning a public argument with Karen. She thrived on conflict, but only when she had the upper hand. This time, she didn't. So I let her storm off in a huff, thinking she'd won the interaction. Let her feel comfortable. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote a detailed email to the HOA board. I explained the full story. The false noise complaint, the retaliation, the discovery of her son's band, and the illegal use of the garage as a rehearsal studio. I attached the ordinance, the timestamps, and the video evidence. I made sure to be calm, respectful, and thorough. I didn't want this to seem like a personal vendetta. It wasn't. It was about fairness and principle. The HOA didn't respond right away, but 3 days later, an official-looking envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a letter stating that an emergency meeting of the HOA board had been scheduled to address a matter of potential HOA policy violations and misuse of residential property. It didn't name Karen, but it didn't need to. That Saturday morning, I attended the meeting at the community clubhouse. A handful of board members sat at a long folding table up front. Karen was nowhere in sight, but Kyle and 3 of his bandmates sat off to the side, quiet and visibly uncomfortable. I noticed Kyle's drumstick tattoo on his forearm as he fiddled with a water bottle. His usual cocky demeanor had vanished. The board president, a stern man named Mr. DeLuca, began the meeting by summarizing the complaint. He read directly from my email but kept my name anonymous, referring to me only as a resident. Then he clicked a button and played the video. The room filled with distorted guitar, pounding drums, and Kyle's voice howling through the speakers. It was almost funny how obnoxious it sounded in the echoey room. When it ended, silence followed. One of the board members shook her head slowly and whispered something to another. Mr. DeLuca cleared his throat. "This is a serious breach," he said. "Especially if money was exchanged for use of the space, as some reports suggest. That would constitute an unlicensed business operating in a residential zone." One of the other members raised a hand. "Is it true you were charging others to rehearse in the garage?" Kyle looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. "I mean, yeah, kinda. Like, just $5 a session to cover snacks and stuff." That was all it took. The board was in full motion, debating potential fines, zoning violations, and insurance liabilities. One of them asked if Karen had obtained permits for the equipment or soundproofing. Another wanted to know if the HOA's liability insurance could even cover something like that if someone got hurt. I just sat quietly in the back, watching it all unfold. By the end of the meeting, it was clear things were going to change. The board agreed to begin enforcement action, issue a formal warning to Karen, and revise the HOA noise policy to require 2 eyewitnesses for future complaints, no more anonymous write-ups. Karen's power was finally being questioned, her tactics exposed. As I walked out of the clubhouse, I passed Kyle and his friend standing near the entrance. They didn't look angry, just embarrassed. "Hey," Kyle said as I passed, almost sheepish. "That was rough in there." I nodded. "It didn't have to be." He nodded back. "Yeah. I get it now." I walked home with a strange mix of relief and satisfaction. It hadn't been about revenge, not really. It was about standing up for myself, something I hadn't always done. Karen had thought she could control the narrative, but this time, the truth had been louder than her lies. Weeks passed. The neighborhood slowly returned to its familiar rhythm, lawns being trimmed on Saturdays, kids riding scooters along the sidewalks, and the distant scent of someone grilling burgers around dusk. But something fundamental had changed. The silence wasn't just peaceful now, it was earned. Karen's reign, as everyone quietly acknowledged, had taken a serious hit. The band practices stopped entirely. Karen's garage, once a mini rock venue, now stood eerily quiet, its door always shut, a few potted plants outside serving as weak camouflage. One day, I noticed a garden hose and a plastic rake leaning against the wall where Kyle's drum set used to be. It was like the evidence of their noise crimes had been wiped clean overnight. A neighbor whispered to me at the mailbox that the HOA board had given Karen a formal warning and made her sign a compliance agreement. Another said the city might have fined her for running an unlicensed business. I didn't need confirmation, I could see it in how she carried herself. Karen no longer marched down the street with her clipboard. She stopped sending HOA-wide newsletters filled with passive-aggressive bullet points. No more door notices. No more surprise lawn inspections. Her presence shrank like air hissing out of a balloon. It was as if the neighborhood had collectively realized the emperor had no clothes, and had been blasting heavy metal the whole time. Then came the monthly community cookout, the first one since the HOA's emergency meeting. It was held in the cul-de-sac like always, with folding tables, mismatched chairs, and enough potato salad to feed a battalion. I considered skipping it, thinking I'd gotten enough social exposure for the season. But part of me was curious. I wanted to see how things would play out with everyone now aware of what had gone down. So I went, plate in hand, and kept to the edge of the gathering, chatting casually with neighbors. People were friendly. Warmer than usual. One older couple even patted me on the back and said, "You handled that whole situation with real class." I didn't ask what they meant exactly, I just smiled and nodded. The underlying message was clear. They knew. Everyone did. And whether or not they said it out loud, they appreciated it. Then I saw her. Karen stood near the lemonade cooler, holding a paper plate with a single deviled egg and a sad scoop of coleslaw. She looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. The Karen I remembered would have been at the center of attention, barking instructions, handing out napkins, and policing condiment usage. Now, she lingered at the edge like she wasn't sure she belonged. Her shoulders hunched in a way I'd never seen before. She caught my eye. For a moment, I thought she'd look away. But she didn't. Instead, she walked over. Each step seemed carefully measured, like someone trying not to step on glass. Her expression was unreadable, part apology, part defensiveness, maybe a dash of regret. When she reached me, she paused, took a breath, and spoke. "I owe you an apology," she said. I stared at her for a beat, waiting for the catch, the sarcastic twist, the veiled insult. But it didn't come. "I assumed it was you because you're the only renter on the block," she continued, her voice low. "And because I thought I knew everything that happened around here. I thought I was helping. But I wasn't." I nodded slowly, still a little guarded. "You didn't just assume, Karen. You filed a complaint. You tried to fine me. You made it official." She winced. "I know. And I'm sorry. Truly. I just didn't want it to be Kyle. He's been going through things. And I figured if I kept him busy with music, he'd stay out of trouble." I raised an eyebrow. "By running a full-blown concert hall out of your garage?" Her lips twitched, almost like she was about to defend it, but then she stopped. "You're right," she said. "It was wrong. All of it." There was an awkward silence between us, filled only by the distant chatter of neighbors and the faint clink of someone scooping baked beans into a bowl. Then she surprised me again. "I stepped down from the HOA," she said. "Didn't want to, but the board made it clear that it was time. Honestly, it's probably for the best." That last sentence didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded real. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in a long time. She wasn't the iron-fisted HOA tyrant anymore. She was just a mother who got in over her head, who made a mistake and didn't know how to admit it until she had no other choice. I nodded once. "All right. Apology accepted." She looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Maybe she hadn't expected forgiveness. Maybe she thought I'd hold it over her forever. "I appreciate that," she said quietly, then gave me a small smile, the first one I'd ever seen from her that didn't feel weaponized. She turned and walked away, joining a group of neighbors discussing some new landscaping guidelines. Later that evening, I was heading back to my house when I passed Kyle. He was walking alone, headphones in, backpack slung over one shoulder. I almost didn't say anything, but he stopped me first. "Hey," he said, pulling one earbud out. "Just wanted to say, thanks." "For what?" "For not going nuclear. You could have put that video online. Made it go viral. Could have really wrecked me." I shrugged. "Didn't see the point. You're a kid. You got caught up in something dumb. It happens." He looked down at his shoes. "Yeah, well, lesson learned. Garage is off limits now. Mom made sure of that." We both laughed, just a little. "Next time," I said, "rent a studio. Or at least get a soundproofed shed." "Working on it," he said with a grin, then gave me a nod before walking off into the twilight. That night, I sat on my porch, sipping tea. The only sound was the soft chirping of crickets and the occasional bark of a dog down the street. No drums. No guitars. No screaming into microphones. Just peace. And beneath that peace was something better, respect. Not just from Karen, but from the neighborhood. From people who'd seen someone stand up against pettiness and double standards and come out not bitter, not broken, but balanced. Karen thought she could bury the truth under pink paper and HOA letters. But in the end, the truth made more noise than any drum kit ever could.